And now, one of the things that, a couple of issues that came up were, the importance of the EU and the European community generally, but also issues related to Spain, the broader Spanish environment, public opinion. And both of these are issues that are highly dependent on public diplomacy. And one of the things that's very interesting about the Catalan case is how aggressive and innovative they have been with public diplomacy, more so than many larger states around the world. And particularly innovative in the use of public-private partnerships and digital diplomacy. And those are some of the things that we'll talk about today. Before we get started, I do want to say something I meant to say at the outset, which is that our institute, the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, did reach out through PJ to the Spanish embassy, the ambassador specifically, numerous occasions, went back and forth with them, inviting them to have a panelist for either of these panels. But it didn't work out from their end, but that was an effort that we made. So what I want to do now is start with very brief sort of opening remarks. I want to really have this be more discussion-oriented. But I want to start with Alberto Royo, the Secretary General of Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia, our co-sponsors for this event.
This is badly known in Southern Europe, and it gives us some comparative advantage. Just as an example of what I'm saying, 2 weeks ago, the spokesperson of the Spanish government stated that Catalonia cannot perform public diplomacy because it's not a state. So it cannot establish diplomatic relations. So it makes you understand the amount of work that we have to do so as to explain what public diplomacy is. Let me offer you some words about the Public Diplomacy Council of Catalonia, about Diplocat. As I said, this institution is a young institution. It was created in November 2012 as a PPP, a public-private partnership. It's composed of the government of Catalonia, which is the main partner. The president of the government of Catalonia is also the president of Diplocat. But we also count on the Barcelona City Council and the city councils of the main cities in Catalonia, the 4 provinces, all the universities of Catalonia, business and international affairs schools, all the chambers of commerce, the main employers associations and trade unions, several social institutions, and even FC Barcelona, which is probably, together with the city of Barcelona, our best known brand worldwide. So strictly speaking, we are not part of the government, but we keep a very good relationship with it. We work together, especially with the Secretariat for Foreign Affairs and with the 5 delegations that the Catalan government has all around Europe, namely in Paris, Brussels, Berlin, London, and here in the States, in Washington and New York. We do think that this pluralistic board increases the impact of our messages to our international audiences. And this is probably what Ellen Huig, again, calls the domestic dimension to public diplomacy. This allows us to go beyond the expected limits of public diplomacy at subnational level, because it offers us the possibility to create a stronger message, to have diversity in our sources, to generate synergies among all these institutions, and to share cost, which is also relevant. So we do think that this approach increases the effectiveness of our activity and lets our partners benefit from them. Well, we try to strengthen the relationship between Catalonia's institutions and civil society and those of the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And we try to do this through 2 ways. First, by importing to our constituency some of the most relevant political, economic, and social debates, and by trying to involve our people into them. We are convinced that only by contributing to the main challenges that the European and the international community are facing will be ever heard, and we try to explain our story to the world. So just to mention, recently we have organized seminars, for instance, on the principle of the responsibility to protect in Barcelona, and the role of the international civil society in pushing for it, and the role of the EU institutions in implementing this new principle. And we count on a representative of the World Federalist Movement and several national coalitions for the R2P, as well as on representative of the main EU institutions. We also organized, quite recently, a seminar on the rise of xenophobic, far-right and populist movements in Europe, together with the Open Society Foundation, also in Barcelona. And we also organized a conference on the current state of digital diplomacy. in which we had the opportunity to count on Ambassador Sarukhan and also on the British Ambassador Tom Fletcher. So in a nutshell, the message we want to convey to the world is that Catalonia has a clear international vocation and it's a responsible, serious and committed international player. So we try to strengthen the relationship between Catalonia and the rest of the world by importing these discussions to Catalonia and involving our people in these discussions, but also by explaining Catalonia's story to the world. So we try to present our country, its assets and possibilities to foreign audiences, and we listen to concerns and suggestions of our foreign partners. And of course, right now, the first question that we are posed is what is happening there in Catalonia with all this independence process. So we try to offer accurate information and provoke discussion and open debate on the situation and the political situation in Catalonia, and we try to convey the message that 80% of Catalans want to hold a referendum, and we try to explain why. I think this is the key figure. 80% of Catalans want to hold a referendum on their political future. How do we do this? Well, we basically use four, let's say, traditional tools of public diplomacy. Through through a series of academic debates in prestigious centers like this one, for instance, on the Catalan political situation. We think that academia is often a good entrance to the real political fora. Since summer 2013, 1 year and a half ago, we have organized more than 20 seminars all around Europe, but also in Japan or in the States, and also have to mention it in Spain. We really think that we have to communicate to the rest of Spain. We are not always visible in the organization of these seminars. Sometimes we act as kind of a broker, convincing the international or the Spanish universities to talk about this. We always record these conferences and we offer them on our website, and we usually even live stream these events. We also try to do so by reaching mass media. Our voice was hardly heard abroad just 2 years ago. Take into account that all the international media, they are based, the ones who are lucky and have a correspondent in Spain, he or she is based in Madrid. Of course, all the embassies are based in Madrid, so we needed, let's say, a strategic work, a strategy of communication so as to explain our story to the world, our point of view to the world. So we developed that strategy, which consists of, first, a website with up-to-date information about what is happening in Catalonia in English, French, and German. This is cataloniavotes.eu. We invite you to surf this website. We usually invite journalists to visit Catalonia. We offer them a tailor-made agenda with meetings with the president of Catalonia, with the opposition, with scholars, local journalists, representatives of the civil society, and so on. We offer op-eds and interviews to the foreign media. Since summer 2014, we have managed to place up to 30 op-eds and 15 interviews in foreign media, which are worth, according to a recent assessment which we made, they are worth the equivalent of, let's say, an international publicity campaign worth almost $1 million. And of course, we never pay a penny for all this text that we offer to the international media. We also have an international visitors program. We have invited up to 100 stakeholders, mainly members of several European parliaments, but also opinion makers to visit our country. And we do have an agreement with the German Marshall Fund Foundation and with the Paris Center for Peace in Israel so as to exchange young leaders from Catalonia to these territories. And last but not least, we try to be very active in digital diplomacy. We have several products. This is Catalonia, which is our let's say, official Twitter account based on similar profiles like the ones of Chile or Finland. We also have the Catalan Voices, which is a curator-based account which let us involve also fellow citizens in disseminating what Catalonia is to the rest of the world. We have specific campaigns in Facebook, mainly linked to the events that we are organizing and to the new posts that we offer on cataloniavotes.eu. And we are also quite active in using Google Plus Hangouts. The most recent one just took place last Thursday. That was on city branding and the impact of the Mobile World Congress, which took place in Barcelona just 2 weeks ago. So to conclude, we do think that if what you are willing to communicate is good enough for the international community, that raises the interests of anywhere, no matter that you are a subnational entity, and you'll find partners and prestigious allies. And for a country like Catalonia, with a very, let's say, particular political situation related to a self-determination process, organizing public diplomacy activities is not only about punching above our weights, and it is, of course, but it's also about showing and demonstrating that we are serious and reliable, and that we can be a good opportunity for our partners rather than a concern. So I leave it here and look forward for a frank and open discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Ambassador Arturo Sarukhan, who's the former Mexican ambassador of the United States and is now a non-resident senior fellow of the Foreign Policy and Metropolitan Policy programs at Brookings.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Diplocat and to George Washington University for the invitation to join you. I thought this was going to be sort of like a Davos-style conversation, so I haven't prepared formal remarks, but let me give you sort of my take on why these tools are critically important, how they're reshaping global international relations, and how they engage with citizens, stakeholders, and constituencies. In many ways, sort of maybe the way to start is that the international system has moved from Thucydides to Twitter. We are in an era where the nation state is no longer the prime or the only player in international relations. Subnational, non-state actors are playing a very important role in international relations. Look at the work that foundations, that NGOs, that even cities and mayors are playing. And this not only reflects, I think, a profound shift that has started to occur in international relations since the end of the Cold War and the end of bipolarity in the international system. It's also, I think, a function of what I think is one of the greatest challenges that a lot of nations are facing around the world today, which is that mainstream political parties and institutions are no longer being perceived by a significant number of citizens as adequate conveyor belts between aspirations and the public policy agenda. And you look at cases around the world, whether it's Brazil and what is happening in Brazil today, or what happened in Chile with the students a couple of years ago, what has happened several times in Israel over concerns over the quality and the quality of life and the expensive nature of providing services there. It's happened in Mexico. It's happened here in the United States. In many ways, the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street are, if you like, two extremes, but certainly two manifestations of a society that increasingly feels the Republicans and Democrats are not being able to deliver the goods and provide a sense of engagement between citizens and public policy. So in this context, the role particular of cities, but also of some governors or provincial leaders, depending on the political system, it is, and it's not surprising, it is at the city level where the connection between public policy and citizens is most alive. And it is also in countries as gridlocked as this one, and others too, where it is at the local level where public policy is being reinvented. In many ways, what we're seeing today in the 21st century is a return to an international system of city-states. What we saw in the late medieval times and early Renaissance of the Genoas, Pisas, Hamburgs, Barcelonas of the world, in many ways is back. The Londons, the Shanghais, the Sao Paulos, the LAs are playing a very important role, not only in terms of how public policy is being reinvented, but on key issues like entrepreneurship, job creation, the relevance and import of creative industries, of how culture plays a role, not only in terms of binding societies, but also of creating economic growth. So it is at the non-state level where public policy is being reinvented. Look at this country again. Look at the United States. It is mayors and cities in the United States that are rethinking public policy. That's why I think, with all due respect to a system which in this country, and PJ may disagree with me, but a system in this country which has become a three-branch government. Not saying anything new, but I will say when I say who controls each branch, you've got a judiciary, then you've got a Republican branch, and then you've got a Democratic branch. The Democrats are in the White House and predictably will probably stay in the White House for quite some time, given the dynamics of what is happening in the Electoral College.
From your lips.
I knew you'd like that. The Republicans are probably ensconced in both houses of Congress for quite some time because of how the dynamics are playing out. So it's the mayors and it's the cities that are reinventing public policy. And this is where public diplomacy, digital diplomacy now in the 21st century, plays a very important role. Because it has become a formidable conduit to engage, to win the hearts and minds, to communicate, to listen, to change narratives, and for countries that have very important and relevant levels of soft power and country or city branding, a unique tool to create a narrative and a perception. The case of Catalonia, the case of Diplocat, I think is very interesting because, albeit it being a relatively recent effort, it has achieved and accrued an important mileage. I was just looking to make sure that I had the latest numbers, 7,000 and something counting followers on the account as of 2 years ago. But the problem is that before this, Catalonia, and I'll say it very frankly, had not been extremely effective beyond, as was mentioned here, the city of Barcelona and my team, FC Barcelona, of communicating a brand of what Catalonia or what Catalans were about. I'm sure that many in the United States would be amazed if you were to tell them that their favorite restaurant, at least in the reviews, El Bulli and the Aday brothers were Catalans. There's a disconnect between many of the virtues and the richness, cultural, historical, gastronomical of Catalonia and how people perceive that. So these tools, regardless what they're used for, become a very important tool to create engagement, to create information, and to create a narrative. And I've always said this. I was the first ambassador accredited to the United States that started using a Twitter account as a public diplomacy outreach tool. And I've always said that any foreign ministry, any ambassador or embassy, or any foundation or local government that has a true global international footprint is not tweeting at their own peril. This is a very important tool that does not supplant diplomacy, does not supplant traditional public diplomacy outreach efforts, but has augmented the bandwidth of engagement, and more importantly, it has augmented the ability to interact. Because digital diplomacy has three basic drivers. You use it to listen, to understand. You use it to engage, that is to put your narrative out, put your spin out, whatever way you want to call it. And three, to interact and create a sense of community and engagement with stakeholders. Whether it's to argue for something, whether it's to change a narrative, whether it's to create, for example, you can imagine that the Mexican embassy in the United States with 35 million Mexican Americans in the United States, and with the largest consular network that any country has on the face of the earth. In another country, we have 50 consulates, career consulates in the United States. By using these tools as a means of engagement with our diaspora community in the United States is a very, very important asset and tool. So I do think, without overselling and overextending and overspinning the role of public diplomacy, and in particular of digital diplomacy, these are tools that provide all manner of international actors, whether they're state or non-state actors, with the ability to engage, explain, and entrap.
Wonderful. PJ, brief?
I suppose I should ask Arturo.
I should introduce PJ formally, because I forgot to do that. Former Assistant Secretary of State and State Department spokesperson, PJ Crowley.
I'm curious, from Arturo's standpoint, how many foreign policies he encountered when he was a U.S. Mexican ambassador to the United States. I'm not sure. I know, there's a California foreign policy, there's a Texas foreign policy, which frequently work to the disadvantage of Mexico. There might be a Florida, foreign policy, particularly as respects to Cuba. But it is true that you have this mass called the United States of America, and yet there's not necessarily coherence at the center. In fact, there's increasing incoherence in the United States. I mean, we have this this contrast in that we're in a world of pirates, where on the one hand, we've moved through the age of mass media to the age of personal communication, and yet the political impact, is, for want of a better term, fragmentation. And we do see that, whereas as government in the United States has become more visible, with the advent of C-SPAN and other things, it has also become less effective. And this is the irony of the tools that we have, and in a world of what Moises Naim calls micropowers, it does create a significant challenge for a megapower like the United States. And Robert Kagan of Brookings wrote a wonderful book where he talked about the schizophrenia of the United States of America. We are a revolutionary power by history, and we are a status quo power by practice, but as Paul said, unless we're not. And ironically, while we're a status quo power, we've been the world's leading disruptor of the status quo when we choose to be. I was struck by what advice I could give to Catalonia. If anyone remembers the Peter Sellers movie, The Mouse That Roared, declare war on Spain.
I thought you were going to say on the United States. That would be even better.
Could do that too. As I know we want to get to a discussion, but the dilemma, as Arturo mentioned, in terms of the rising importance of soft power relative to hard power. The dilemma, as Joe Nye in his various books outline, is the challenge of converting soft power into real influence, to outcomes that the desired outcomes that you have, and that conversion is not automatic. It relies ultimately on, even though we have a increasingly diverse, hyper-competitive global and national political environment, it is finding ways to create leverage along the way, and probably the best recent example of leverage by a sub-state actor against a central government was probably what happened with the Kurds recently. That when Baghdad finally got to a crisis stage with respect to the Islamic State, there was finally a long overdue agreement with the central government regarding the oil law that was negotiated very significantly in Kurdistan's favor. And so in addition to having a public increased profile, that public diplomacy, or as we say at George Washington University, the public dimension of diplomacy. We don't see that you have this thing called diplomacy, and now this separate thing called public diplomacy, where diplomats get to work behind closed doors, and then somebody else gets to explain what they're doing. There's now an overlap. It is about how can you create leverage along the way that enables you to take your soft power and convert that to something of an outcome or a process that enables you to take action as you wish.
So it seems to me that there are a couple of things that are particularly unique and interesting about the challenges for a sub-state entity, whatever term we want to use, like Catalonia, particularly one that's trying to establish independence.
Or self-determination.
Or self-determination, thank you, yes, good clarification. One is external and one is internal. So I wanted you guys to talk about how digital diplomacy or other forms of public diplomacy, because you mentioned visitors programs, sports diplomacy, et cetera, play into that. The external one is the external challenge in part is trying to create awareness and sympathy for the argument that you are a unique entity, right? That you aren't part of a state, that this isn't secession in the, like in the American historical case of the Confederacy. That this is, as the Catalans would say, this was a country that, to your thinking, was sovereign once, was conquered, it should be sovereign again. That's a different argument, right? So there's this external argument, there's something unique, and that's where language programs and cultural diplomacy and other sorts of things come into play. Internally, though, as opposed to the way other, states think of public diplomacy, which is pretty much, always externalized, the external for Catalonia also is within Spain, right? So in other words, there is a need, it seems to me, for Catalonia and others like it to convince citizens in the broader state, and this came up in the first panel, that there's a uniqueness there, et cetera. And so for Catalonia, one of the challenges has always been, seems to me, that most polls within Spain, going back a couple of decades, I think, show that it is one of the least popular of the sovereign autonomous regions, not sovereign I should say, autonomous regions within Spain among Spaniards. And that seems to me to be a real challenge as well. So I wonder if you could comment on the ability of your public diplomacy, or Catalonia's public diplomacy, to reach out externally, and how effective specifically you think that's been as an outside of Spain, but also within Spain. What efforts are there, if any, to challenge sort of and change those sorts of opinions within Spain that might create more pressure on Madrid, let's say, in this case, or something?
Okay. So let's say on the external dimension, I really think that there's been a huge change if we compare the situation today with how Catalonia was known 2 years ago. I would say that probably thanks to the political situation, to the political process in which we are right now, we managed to be quite well known internationally. If we compare the situation with, for instance, Scotland, in the case of Scotland, before having this self-determination process going on, everybody knew Scotland. There was no problem, let's say, of country branding. In the case of Catalonia, we do have a problem. We did have a problem of country branding. And I think we still have one, because it's still, although we are much more known than some years ago, it's very much linked to this political discussion. And we should be able to somehow, separate. One thing is country branding, and we should be able to communicate what Catalonia is, and that we have the Adria brothers, for instance, and El Bulli, and FC Barcelona, and the city of Barcelona, and so many assets which are not politically, let's say, committed. And then we have this political process. Now everything is mixed up, but let's hope that once this story is over, regardless of the outcome of this process, be it independence or not, we at least will be able to be to have our country better known worldwide. Then on the domestic dimension, it's true that we have a lot of work to do in order to convince that Catalonia is a nation, and the fact that Catalonia is a nation, it doesn't mean that we necessarily should be an independent country. We have several examples of composed multinational states We would be happy to be part of one multinational state if, because, let's say, if we are not forced to stop being Catalans to be part of that state, and that's a bit what is happening nowadays. If you want to be Spanish, a real Spaniard, in a way, you have to, let's say, give up your national character as Catalan. So we have to convince Spain that we can live together, and in fact, that we'll live together regardless of the outcome of this process. Because even if we become an independent republic, we'll be part of the EU, and we'll have to cooperate and work together with Spain, and they will be, I'm sure, our best allies in Brussels. But there is a lot of work to be done there. We're trying to do our best, not only organizing seminars and being active in the press. The political, let's say, conflict does not help, but it's true that there is a lot of work to be done there. Just take into account what is happening, for instance, in the UK. If you go to Westminster, in the corridor which links the House of Commons and the House of Lords, there is a room in which you'll see the frescoes of the four nations, patron saints, St. George, St. Andrew, St. David's, and St. Patrick. It's crystal clear that the UK is composed of four nations. And that's the reason why they were so, let's say, easily, that was not easy, but finally, eventually, they had the opportunity to hold a proper referendum. It's not the case in Spain. And that's I would say that's in the core of the political conflict. Another example of what I'm saying, when the Catalan Statute of Autonomy was reformed in the year 2006, there was a sentence which read that Catalonia is a nation. That was not part of, let's say, the legal part of the text, but part of the preamble. There were no legal consequences of that statement. But still, the Constitutional Court of Spain decided to delete that sentence. So, yes, the answer is yes. We have to do a lot of work in Spain. It's not easy, especially if we introduce ourselves as a body of public diplomacy. Sometimes they say, okay, so you're doing public diplomacy, but within Spain, do you consider already that you are a different independent country or what? Well, regardless of how we call it, we have to communicate to the rest of Spain.
I wonder, Ambassador and PJ, if you can also speak to the challenges from the perspective of other governments trying to balance in your foreign policy and your public diplomacy engagement, exchange programs, etc. In a situation like this, where you've got Madrid, you have the official sovereign nation, very much obviously opposed to what this sub-state's trying to do, and yet, particularly in the case of Catalonia, where they have basically a parallel system in a few of these countries, Brussels, in Brussels and Berlin, and here in Paris, in London, of sort of another embassy. How do you balance that from the perspective of another government in trying to deal with Spain versus Catalonia and their public diplomacy outreach and other policy?
The one issue that popped into my mind is the delegate challenge of Taiwan, where there is a diplomatic relationship, there is an informal diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. There's the Taiwan Relations Act that governs the United States' support for Taiwan, but it's within the construct of a larger political agreement that ultimately relies on Taiwan and the mainland to resolve and define its future relationship. The U.S. policy towards Taiwan is one of support to prevent a hostile takeover of the existing Taiwanese government by the mainland without the consent of the Taiwanese people, without necessarily having the United States define a solution for what that ultimate relationship might be. So it's always complex in terms of the United States as a narrative will say a country X should respond to the aspirations of the people of that country without specifying what that response should be, because you do have, you'll have a situation like existed in Tahrir Square, which was reforming a system without necessarily changing the inherent construct of the country Egypt. The United States had that same narrative with a very different outlook with respect to a country like Bahrain. And for the United States, there's that is one narrative, two applications that we recognize that many in the world there's a policy incoherence there, and yet there's a particular reality. I think Arturo mentioned that what the United States wants to see is at the end of whatever process might be outlined, there's stability and viability. Mm-hmm. I think the challenge for Catalan and the parallel to me to Scotland was this was a two-step process. You did have a vote recently, but you had a process back in the 90s of devolution of real responsibility from the central government, to regional governments, and then the Scots thought to themselves that the natural evolution of devolution was independence. So in terms of outlining a process of how the relationship of Barcelona to the center in Madrid, would outline a multi-step process that you convey could be orderly. I don't know, as Paul said, that you're going to get overt support by a country like the United States. You might get a conversation below the surface. In any relationship that the United States has with another country, we will talk to various opposition elements, whatever their dimension, but we have only one relationship, and that is with the central government.
Ambassador.
Yeah, I think a lot of this will be immersed in what I think is one of the central tensions occurring today in the international arena, which is that yes, on the one hand, there does seem to be a post-Westphalian world developing, a rules-based international, 21st century international rules-based system that is slowly, sometimes haphazardly, developed since the end of the Cold War. Issues that are very dear and near to me, like R2P, the responsibility to protect, have had a bumpy road for a number of reasons, but I think they point to the future of what the international system would need to look like. But at the same time, revisionist or challenger or new powers are pushing back against this post-Westphalian vision. They are reasserting, in many ways, a Westphalian system of international governance. And you see it in this hemisphere, and you see it in other parts of the world, where what happens inside the borders of a nation is an issue of national sovereignty, and therefore outsiders should not, in the words of these state governments, be involving themselves or talking about these issues. The debate over Catalonia and its future in Europe, in Spain, I think will be articulated a great deal on these premises, because there are countries around the world, Mexico is a case in point, where in our constitution the principle of self-determination of peoples is enshrined as one of the tenets of Mexico's foreign policy. But at the same time, I know that Mexico, like many other extra-European countries, will probably play a game of waiting and seeing. They will wait to see, I think in particular, how Europe and the European Union deal with this issue, and they will let Europe sort of, in Spanish we say, llevar la mano, will have the lead on how they define and how they establish the interactions and the dynamics and the parameters of discussion over not only Catalonia, but also what happens to new entrants into the European Union that were already part of the European Union, which I think will be the hot potato that Brussels will have to deal with at some point. But I think outside the European sphere, I think most countries are going to will be in a wait-and-see mode and see how Europe defines the parameters of the discussion around this issue.
So yeah, so which is Paul's point from the first panel about getting the real challenge. I guess the first and foremost challenge is getting Europe to yes, right? I think is how you put it. Because no matter how post-Westphalian we've been talking about the world becoming for the last 10 or 15 years, or since the end of the Cold War, I guess, states still deal with states, which is what I hear you saying.
Yes.
My last question before we go.
Can I qualify?
Yeah.
States still deal with states, but there are some states that are starting to deal with other non-state actors. So you've got a multi-tiered system, which is, and that's why I say it's in that tension and that contradiction where a lot of this debate will play out.
Which is particularly where digital diplomacy, new media come into play. And so my last question before we open up to questions, and I know the ambassador has to leave in about 10 or 15 minutes, is what would you say out of all the various kinds of public diplomacy outreach, sports diplomacy, economic diplomacy, cultural exchange programs, visitor programs, digital diplomacy, mentioned, the ambassador said you don't tweet at your own peril, that sort of thing. What would you say have been the most effective public diplomacy tools over the last couple of years for Catalonia, and why? Why do you think they were the most effective? Just, a couple of them. Because what I'm getting at is, one of the things in public diplomacy discussions is, we do a lot of these sorts of events, obviously, here at GW, is we talk a lot about public diplomacy, governments talk a lot about the public diplomacy they're doing, but the idea of measuring its effectiveness, knowing what works, knowing where to dedicate resources, because public diplomacy is like any other policy. It requires the dedication of resources, which means that are finite, which means you need to know what's effective and not effective, where to put those resources. So what would you say has been effective and why?
Well, it's difficult to have a clear answer because this strategy is quite young, and you need some time to assess the outcome, the results of this strategy. But I would say that taking into account that for us it's really a priority to communicate to influential stakeholders and to let them know what is happening nowadays in Catalonia, I would say probably the work that we've been doing with foreign press has been really useful, so as to have the story being covered by the main international media, and probably the visitors program, inviting stakeholders mainly from Europe, MPs, ministers, journalists, opinion makers, and so on, to visit our territory, to visit our country, and to let them the opportunity, to give them the opportunity to understand by themselves what is happening there. Because, we can always communicate, okay, this is a peaceful, democratic process, there is a political conflict, but there is no social conflict, it is a bottom-up process, and so on and so forth. But the best way to convince international partners is by inviting them to visit our territory, and so that they have the opportunity to understand and see by themselves what is happening.
Right. One of the challenges for Catalonia, for instance, is that most of the international media are based in Madrid.
Yeah.
And so it's much more, one of the things that, all the academic literature about news says is that, particularly, objective news, is that, the efficiency really defines news work. And so if you've got your international reporters based in Madrid, it's a real challenge in terms of narratives. Let me open it up for questions, because I know that the ambassador has to leave in about 10 minutes. Yes, sir. And if you can make sure that you ask an actual question and keep it brief, that would be terrific.
My name is Louis Bintro. I'm a retired chemist, therefore free of guilt. And I'll show my colors right away. I was expecting at my 80th birthday, I would see a Catalonia free of occupation, at least political occupation, but it doesn't look like it's going to be. My question is timing, and it's a question for these young reps of Generalitat. Unless my numbers are wrong, at the end of last year, the debt of the Generalitat was 70 billion euros. And the part of the debt of Spain is probably 130 billion. So that makes for the tiny figure of 200 billion in debt for an eventual independent Catalonia. This let's face it, puts us lower, puts Catalonia lower than Greece, one notch below. And my question to the Generalitat reps is, how do you plan to answer this objection? Because in Brussels, as everybody says, we have to be in Brussels. Paris in Brussels is more Madrid than Madrid. We all know that, right? So who is left? Is Frankfurt, Bonn. And how can we, Catalonia, sell the idea of another Greece? And that was pointed out in the Frankfurter Allgemeine the day after President Mas decided timing question. But my point is to you, how do you guys plan to challenge this thing? Because Frankfurt is the only welcoming group in Brussels of any weight. And I'll finish. Thank you very much.
That's a very good point. What I teach my students in my public diplomacy class, Lola was a student, is you have to see the larger context of what you're trying to communicate. And the dilemma outside of the borders of Spain is that the international context right now is the future viability of the European Union. Because of the debt issue and the political issue, the tension between Greece and Germany as it relates to its debt and what it's doing about it. So anything at the present time that is perceived as adding to the burden of the European Union is going to create at least a skepticism. To your point about timing, understand the larger point you have, but not now. That's why I think to differentiate from Paul from the previous panel a little bit, the first solution to Catalonia's challenge is in fact Madrid. Is outlining a process that says, there's a vision here first and foremost of a different kind of relationship between Barcelona as a state and Madrid as a state. And that process is very eminently doable. And then that's a very good question in terms of what that means about independence. And to go back to the issue of relations between Taiwan and the mainland, the relationship between the two is as stable as it has been probably in 25 or 30 years, expressly because one of the parties actually took the question of independence off the table. Now if the DPP at any time soon replaces the KMT and independence comes back on the table as a political option, the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland will immediately go into a crisis state. So to go back to Scotland, the first step was to change the relationship of the region to the center, and then over time begin a larger conversation that says, because this worked out well, other options can be perceived without destabilizing either Spain as a significant actor in the regional and global stage, or the European Union. Until you can make that argument, I doubt, inside the country, I doubt you're necessarily going to have overt support beyond the country.
I want to hear what Albert has to say, but I know that the ambassador has to leave, so I'll give you your last chance here, if you want to comment on this real quick. Okay, so if we could say goodbye to our distinguished guest who has to go to another meeting. Albert, this is obviously a place where your economic diplomacy comes in, but one of the parallel points that PJ has that's I think relevant to the question is, you've got to convince, you not only have to convince Brussels and the rest of the European community and world community that you won't become Greece, but that even if you're economically viable, that you're not taking all of the viability out of Spain and therefore creating another problem there. So what have you guys been doing on this in terms of your narrative?
Well, I have to admit that I was quite surprised by this question, because nobody seems to be doubting about the viability, the economic viability of an independent Catalonia up to now. Taking into account that we are suffering an 8% deficit, fiscal deficit between Catalonia and the rest of Spain. So we are contributing with 16 billion euros per year to the rest of the country, which is precisely 50% of our regional budget. So just to understand how much we are contributing to the rest of Spain. We're happy to keep on helping poorer regions, although we are not the richest region in Spain, I have to say. We are the 4th wealthiest region in Spain in terms of GDP per capita before taxes. But then we drop to the 10th position after taxes, once this redistribution has been taking place from Madrid. So at least up to now, the main discussion was what could happen to the rest of Spain if Catalonia left the state. And I can quote the Minister for Economic Affairs of the government of Catalonia, who once said, if we have to choose between freedom and money, we choose freedom. So if we have to keep on helping poor regions of Spain, we are ready to do so. But we want freedom, which means that we want to say in Brussels where 70% of the laws are designed. It's not about having new checkpoints at the border of Catalonia or about having a new national currency. It's not about independence in the sense of the 19th century. It's about having a say in Brussels. It's about being able to represent our interests there and being able to participate in this fantastic process, which is the building of a political union in Europe. And there, either you have your own representation, which means that you need your own state, or you're not there.
In the back?
Hi, my name is Nicolas Alonso. I'm a Spanish student studying at Georgetown University. I'm a 3rd year doing international politics. As Mark said at the beginning, it was his duty to be here. It's not my duty to be here, but I cannot do but not talk right now because I've lived in Spain 18 years. And sir, with all due respect, to say that Catalonia is occupied is the biggest fallacy I've heard today.
Do you have a question, by the way?
Yeah, I'll get to it. Catalonia is not occupied. There's not an oppression. It's not like apartheid South Africa or nothing like that. Catalonia is a free place. It's a great place, just like the rest of Spain. And getting to this, I want to ask Albert, just when you refer to Spain not being multinational, I don't exactly know what you refer to, because Galicia has its own language, its own gastronomy. The vast country seems to me, or to many people, much more diverse and different to the rest of Spain than Catalonia. Their language is not even rooted in a Latin base. Their language, you can't even understand. You go there and you wouldn't understand the word. I go to Catalonia, I don't speak Catalan, and I would easily understand. On your point on contribution, Madrid contributes 0.01% less than Catalonia. So, I mean, yes, they're both economic powerhouses. It's how a state works. You redistribute to the poorer regions, and the largest economies contribute more to the overall economy. So I was just wondering, especially on the multinational thing, because I've lived in Spain, I believe that the beauty of Spain is being multinational. People go to Spain to go to Galicia and have pulpo, and then go to Valencia and have paella, then go to Andalucía and have gazpacho, and then go to Catalonia and have crema catalana. So I don't understand where that comes from. Thank you.
Sure. I completely agree with you. The problem is that the Spanish Constitution does not foresee it. Spain, it's said there, is a singular nation, and it cannot be split. It's only one nation. And that's precisely in the core of the problem that we are facing nowadays. But I completely agree with you. Spain, in reality, it's a multinational state, but it's not being recognized as such by its own constitution. And not only this, but I think it's worth knowing that the Spanish constitution foresees that the army have the duties to safeguard Spain's unity as a nation. It's one of the few, if not the only, constitution which foresees the possibility that the army can act against its own people. So we are precisely talking about this. We need a better, institutional and political frame. It could be within Spain if Spain were ready and Spaniards were ready to accept this diversity, or if it's not possible, why not in a united and diverse Europe?
Would you say that most of your public diplomacy, particularly whatever you're doing within Spain, you mentioned a couple of programs, outreach programs, would you say that most of your public diplomacy outreach is is sort of framed around the question of independence, or is it primarily framed around the question of self-determination, which is different, as was pointed out, I think, quite well in the first panel?
We are working on following the same line everywhere. We're mainly passing on the message that the referendum should be possible, so that we need a democratic way to solve what is happening there. We're not campaigning for independence or against independence.
So self-determination.
Self-determination, exactly.
Yeah, I would point out that in the United States, the Union Army went to war to preserve the Union. So we Americans can identify, with the importance of the Army protecting the integrity of the state, absent a political agreement. I think it is vitally important for Catalonia to continue to develop a narrative, to tell a story, and through that story, to convey a different vision for Spain and a different vision for Catalonia that people can accept, identify with, and then support. But I don't think that public diplomacy by itself works absent, political leverage. Two examples that come to mind. One is in Turkey. The plight of the Kurds for a long time was a very significant issue within Turkey, and the Kurds only advanced their political rights and their cultural rights when they became important political factors, in the not only within Turkey as a voting bloc in support of the AKP, and then in terms of a symbol of Turkey's ambition for membership in the European Union. At that point, you had a domestic dynamic and a regional dynamic that converged in ways that at least have advanced the cause of the Kurds in the process. I think as we look in the international scene, one fascinating story of the Israeli election tomorrow will be what happens to the Arab-Israeli bloc. Their tradition within Israel has been to keep the existing political process at arm's length, and as a result of that, they have underachieved in terms of their rights within the modern Israeli state. They have finally recently begun to unify as a political bloc, and now have the potential to be a kingmaker tomorrow in terms of the Israeli election and the division that exists, within the Israeli body politic. May or may, they may have that leverage, and they may or may not exercise that leverage effectively, but all of a sudden, given the political dynamic, they've become a factor. So public diplomacy is about telling a story. Public diplomacy / soft power is also about managing politics, to create levers that allow you to work within the existing system, and then through the existing system, ultimately get acceptance for the alternatives that you're trying to promote.
We have time for one more. question.
I would like to make some remarks and a question about the army.
Oh, no, we don't
Wait
need
for the-
remarks. So,
A question about the army.
okay, get to the question because we're short on time.
Do you think that the army is going to take or assume powers unilaterally according to Constitution, or you will expect orders from the civil society, the civil governments, as happened in 1982 at the end of coup, that the parliament was kidnapped and the army saved the situation, but following the instructions of the civil governments? And also, what happened with the Generalitat declared unilateral independence during the Spanish Republic? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I get the first question. But anyway, I do assume that in a democratic country like Spain, the army will follow, the instructions of the civil power. This is namely the Spanish government. So I don't foresee, let's say, any possibilities of a violent reaction coming up from the side of the Spanish army, regardless of what may happen in Catalonia, as long as it is, a democratic and peaceful process. Being said so, I was also quite shocked about the statements made by the head of the Spanish military, who compared what is happening nowadays in Catalonia with the loss of Spanish colonies in 1898, the Philippines and Cuba. It's like, you're treating us like a colony or what? That was quite surprising. But I really think that the Spanish army is a democratic army, it's a modern army, it's participating in many international missions, and we are happy that they are there and they participate, let's say, in the international governance in this sense. So we don't expect any kind of, let's say, violent reaction to what is happening in Catalonia. No way.
Okay, we're actually out of time, so I want to thank all of our panelists today and the audience for coming. It was a very fascinating topic, very complicated, as we see, and very passionate, obviously, as we would expect.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.